Ukraine end? It's a question that when will the war in Ukraine end? When will the war in Ukraine end? When will the war in Ukraine end? It's a question that when will the war in Ukraine end? It's a question that no one has an answer to. Ukraine has stated that they will fight until every Russian soul has retreated, but Russia has made it clear that they will not retreat until a new border is drawn and Ukraine is not admitted into NATO. It appears both countries are locked in a stalemate, and the US is now involved in our next forever war. But what's really happening in Ukraine, and is there a solution to this complex geopolitical problem? Joining me in today's episode is Patrick Lancaster, an independent American journalist who has been on the ground in Ukraine for most of the last decade. I first spoke to Patrick in March 2022, a few weeks after Russia began its latest military operation. And here we are, 18 months later, and unfortunately there has been very little progress on this war. The goal for today's episode is to ask questions, seek answers, and hopefully find a solution to this intense conflict. Let's jump right in. Well, everybody, I'm very honored to welcome back into the studio Patrick Lancaster. He's an independent journalist that has spent a significant amount of time in both Ukraine and Russia. He is one of the most important voices, in my opinion, in this entire matter because he's on the ground, he speaks the Russian language. And Patrick, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today.
Well, thank you, Cyrus, for having me again. It's great. So, I mean, you're a year and a half on from the last time we talked, so I think it's a pretty good time to have another update today.
When I first interviewed you, this was March 2022, just a few weeks into this new conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I think that's something many people need to understand. This is not, this conflict did not begin in February 2022. It started many years ago. I mean, really back to the 1990s with the fall of the Soviet Union. And this is an incredibly complex situation that we're looking at. And I want to start off there. I'd like to get an update because obviously here we are 18 months later. It's August 2023, and we really need to get an update on what has been happening, what's going on, and can't think of the better person to give us that update. So please let us know, in your opinion, in your experience.
And to let people know, I've been covering this, as you said, this didn't just start in 2022. It started quite a while ago. I've been here covering it since 2014, just after I started when Crimea had their referendum to break away from Ukraine and Russia, and then I came here to Donetsk, where I am right now, to cover the escalation of protests and things like this, what eventually led to the referendum or vote of the local population to break away from Ukraine in the beginning of, or the spring of 2014, which preceded this already 9-year war. Because after they did that, Ukraine came in and started taking back what they felt the locals were taking from them and started blaming it on Russia, because the locals here are ethnically Russian. If you look at what is looked at by the United States government and Ukrainian government, this is Ukraine. If you look at what the local population here has once and has been saying since 2014, that this is not part of Ukraine. It was voted in 2014 as the Donetsk People's Republic, just like up north, the Lugansk area was voted by the local population to be the Lugansk People's Republic. And one update since the last time we met was the second referendum that took place in September of last year, where these regions, along with the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, had Russian-backed referendums to not only break away from Ukraine, because Donetsk and Lugansk had before, but to join Russia as well. Covered those referendums from Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Donetsk. I didn't quite make it up to Lugansk, but covered the best I could. So that's a little bit of the background of the local population, because what the area is, as I said, it's looked at as Ukraine by Ukraine and the West. But the people that live here look at this area right now as part of Russia, as well as Russian law looks at it. So you think many people would probably consider more important what the people that live in the area have to say about the situation. Go beyond that. As you said, we last talked in March of 2022, where this new escalation, you could say, or the official movement of Russian forces into Donbass took place just weeks before. We talked, as well as Russia recognizing the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic as independent republics away from Ukraine. So it was kind of a stepping stone. Of course, the local population had expected and hoped Russia would recognize them sooner, like Russia did Crimea, when Russia immediately took Crimea in 2014. But the fact is, they didn't, and it took 8 years, but it happened. So after we talked last time, the war intensified, and as well as in the beginning of March, I believe we had talked about the cluster bombs that Ukraine launched on the center of Donetsk. That just happened to be 200 meters from my apartments, where I held my family, my wife, and 2 children. Since then, I moved them farther away into safety, but I've still been covering here in Donetsk, Lugansk, the Kharkov region, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and of course the Mariupol area. As time went on through the spring, fighting intensified, and the Azov battalion got cordoned off. It's surrounded in Mariupol, large amounts of them, and they refused to give up, which inevitably caused Mariupol to be almost completely destroyed. I was there almost every day covering the activities. It was hard to say what was happening from what side, but the majority of the interviews that I got reported, and this is all facts from people reporting this on my channel, reported Ukrainian forces, Azov forces, firing on civilian buildings and snipers firing on civilians. This is not my words, it's not my opinions, these are the witnesses that I interviewed. And I also was first on the scene it was actually school number 25 in Mariupol, where the Azov Battalion Ukrainian forces had turned the basement into a makeshift base, you could say. And arriving on the scene, we found a young woman that had she was naked, clearly been raped and tortured. She had a swastika either burned or cut into her stomach, and a plastic bag pulled over her head with blood all over it. Documented that the best I could. Unfortunately, that was just one of the horrible stories. But as the days went on in Mariupol, documenting all the horrible things in Kiev, the assistance of Zelensky and some deputies from Ukraine took some of the screenshots from my video and other journalist material from the location where that woman was tortured, and lied about it and said that it was Russian atrocities in Bucha and near Kiev. There's total lies by the Ukrainian government about this. And this still today can be found online in different media that picked up what they had to say. Some of the media still say that it was true, and some of the media backtrack and say, well, okay, that was recorded by Patrick Lancaster on this day, and it looks exactly like the picture, so maybe it's not true. Good up to the agencies that fixed their problems and called out the Ukrainian government lying about the situation. But as we went on, we just saw the Azov squeezing the civilian population, literally squeezing many of them down into the catacombs below the Azov-style plant. And I mean, can't go through every day of the Battle of Mariupol, but I tried to show, I have the archive on my channel, almost every day report everything from intense fighting, just outside the gates of the Azov-style between the Russian, Chechnyan forces and Ukrainian forces, to daily life of the civilians. Luckily, we were able to evacuate some elderly people. Me and my team were able to get them out, get some of them to safety, because while I was there, many families were writing me and my team to help their family members. Fortunately, sometimes when we got to the addresses we had, it was too late, so they had already passed, but we got as many out as we could. And then Russia finally took over control of Mariupol, and now, since then, Russia has been rebuilding Mariupol. There's many apartment buildings and different social buildings and historical buildings that are either been getting rebuilt or completely built from new.
So Patrick, just to, I want to kind of recap this for the average viewer that might not have tremendous knowledge between Russia and Ukraine and this conflict that's going on. What we're dealing with is, this is very common with a lot of former Soviet Union countries, that there is still a very large ethnic Russian population within this. So, for example, if we're looking at Ukraine, there is a lot of ethnic Russians that would be in Ukraine. And, for example, Crimea, predominantly would be ethnically Russian. Many of those people would have Russian passports, speak Russian language, consider themselves Russian, just merely living in this area. It has become this geopolitical hot zone because, like you said, Ukraine and the West look at it as Ukraine, the local people in the Russian government look at it as Russia. So it's a very complicated, complex situation. And I think what's very interesting, and what I'm really trying to gather as myself, as someone who's trying to understand the situation more, is I think whenever we have a war, there is a lot of a gray area that exists. Because, for example, in the West, we hear a tremendous amount of the atrocities that Russia is doing in Asia, and also makes their lives devastated by what other things they have about it. How about in other cities? For example, what about if we go outside of these areas that are where the local people sell Russia? What about the areas that are where people are very adamant that they're Ukrainian? Has there been a lot of civilian damage or from the Russian side? Has there been civilian lives lost?
It seems there has been civilian lives lost on both sides, which is horrible on any side. But unfortunately, when someone like me has been reporting on one side for so long, if I would go over to the Ukrainian controlled territory, it would not be a good situation for me. And this is why I tell my viewers, don't just watch my reports. Watch reports on the other side. Educate yourself as much as possible, and as much information, so you're not just led by the Western mainstream media. Western mainstream media will say, just watch our side. Don't watch Patrick Lancaster's side. In fact, they do it regularly. They literally say, don't watch my material, or watch material on this headline. They only want you to see the material that they put out, which is half-truths or outright lies.
There's always two sides to every story, and I think what we in the West, we always have this interpretation that Vladimir Putin is 100% wrong, Zelensky is 100% right, and this is a huge fight between democracy and values versus autocracy, and basically Russia is the evil person here. Now I think that what we can look at is, for example, even myself, I'll be very clear, I don't support Vladimir Putin invading and really escalating this conflict. I think there's a lot of things that have certainly added to that. For example, we can certainly look at NATO expansion. I think many people, I think we can all recognize that's a fact, right? That we guaranteed Russia that we would not expand by 1 inch, as famously said in the 1990s, that NATO will not go 1 inch further east. Of course, we expanded 5 single times to that. Interesting enough, I was talking to a fellow American yesterday, and NATO expansion is a very big part of this equation, right? We expanded 5 times right up to the Russian border, and Russia has said, this is a red line for us. It's very similar to Cuba, right? You're not going to have somebody in Russia or China and saying, we're going to massive military base in Cuba, we're going to have state weapons there. It's not going to happen, right? The United States would never, ever let that happen in the hemisphere. So I think, obviously John Mearsheimer, a very famous geopolitical professor, was one that really sent it out and predicted this. Ukraine is going to get back to this result of this. I want to switch gears here more to the Ukrainian side, because, for example, I'll be honest, I'm here gathering information, I'm here for viewers as well, because I'm wanting to ask you tough questions, I'm wanting to get the answers and really understand the conflict more. Russia's failing, the Russian economy is taking Vladimir Putin has been having an office lab, the Russian army watching videos from, for example, Colonel Vj-Vreque, who said that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has been a disaster. There's the Ukrainian forces have lost a tremendous amount of lives, and it's become very obvious to me that it's not going to be resolved anytime soon. I'm fearful that this is the America's next threat war. When we talk about kind of that gray area, for example, what about the Ukrainian counteroffensive and claims that Russia's going to fail any moment?
Okay, well, I'm trying to cover as much in the question as possible. If we look at Russia overall failing, let's take the ruble, for example. Right now, the ruble is not performing very well. It's almost 1 ruble for 1 US penny. Now, and that's been, I believe, the last 5-6 weeks or so, it's gone from 70 down to that. Now, if we look at 18 months ago, the ruble actually went down to 150 to 1. So $1, 150. And then it came back and was the best performing currency in the world for a good. Yeah. So now it's going back down. So what's going to happen next as far as the economical aspect of it? I don't know. Still, people are still living in Russia. And actually, as far as the payment for the soldiers go, even though there's a mobilization, frontline soldiers are getting about 200,000 rubles. Right now it's about $2,000. It was more a few months ago. But this is in contrast to 2.5 years ago when the local Donetsk and Lugansk Republic forces were getting paid about 25,000 rubles, with about 13% of what it is years ago, when the local Donetsk and Lugansk Republic forces were getting paid about 25,000 rubles, with about 13% of what it is now. Local Donetsk and Lugansk Republic forces were getting paid about 25,000 rubles, with about 13% of what it is now, 2.5 years ago. So that also has to take into account the inflation. That's on to the counteroffensive. To me, on to the counteroffensive. On to the counter. What's when general on to what's when General Miley just a couple of days ago made a statement saying that Ukraine had broken through the first ring of the defense of Russia. Total play on words. Because, okay, maybe they've broken through one little spot, one little village, and that has virtually been happening through the winter as well. Little villages back and forth here. But as far as a major breakthrough, just using word game. That has not happened at all. But there is intense fighting. There's no question that during the spring, the fighting has intensified significantly across the front lines, with small movements here and there. But as far as major movements, I can't report anything at this time, but there is a lot of talk of the new Russian offensive, which they're going to be supportly pushing in many directions. So, I mean, that's just speculation.
Als ondernemer hou je natuurlijk van risico,
facts,
maar niet van onnodig
yet,
risico.
but